The neon lights of the McDonald's flickered against the darkened sky, casting an eerie glow on the near-empty parking lot. Keanu Reeves barely noticed. His mind was clouded with exhaustion, his body aching from the grueling hours on set. He wasn't in the mood for autographs or small talk. He just wanted to grab a quick bite and disappear into the quiet of the night. The moment he stepped inside, however, something felt off. The restaurant wasn't crowded, just a handful of customers scattered across tables, hunched over their meals. But in the farthest corner, in the dimmest part of the room, two little girls moved silently from table to table. Identical twins, dressed in matching yellow dresses that might have once been bright but now looked worn and dirty. Their small hands, people ignored them. Some turned their heads, pretending not to see. Others dismissed them with a wave. Their Keanu's stomach twisted. He had seen desperation before, but something about these girls, something about the way their shoulders tensed each time they were brushed aside, made his pulse quicken. Then one of them turned to him. Her large eyes locked onto his, filled with something raw, something too heavy for a child to bear. Slowly, hesitantly, she stepped closer. She leaned in, and in a voice barely louder than a whisper, she spoke. And the words she said made Keanu's breath catch in his throat. For a moment, Keanu just sat there, frozen. The restaurant noise, the hum of conversation, the clatter of trays, became muffled, like he was sinking underwater. He stared at the little girl, his mind racing to process what she had just said. "Please help us." Her voice was so small, so fragile, yet it carried a weight that pressed against his chest. Keanu glanced around, expecting to see a guardian nearby, someone who should have been watching over them. But there was no one, just the other customers, who continued eating as if nothing was wrong, as if these two little girls didn't exist. "Where's your mom?" he asked, his voice low, gentle. The girl hesitated. Her twin, still lingering near a nearby table, looked toward her, then back at Keanu, as if silently urging her to be careful. Keanu noticed it then, the way they carried themselves, the stiffness in their movements, the way their eyes darted, calculating, wary. This wasn't just hunger. This was fear. A deep unease settled over him. He had encountered hardship before, had spent his life believing in kindness, in second chances. But this felt different. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a few bills, placing them on the table. "Are you hungry?" he asked. "Here, go buy something to eat." The girl didn't move. She didn't even look at the money. Instead, she shook her head. "It's not about food," she whispered. The air around Keanu felt heavier. He sat up straighter, fully alert now. "Then what is it?" Before she could answer, the door to the restaurant swung open with a harsh creak. Keanu's gaze snapped up. A woman stormed in, unkempt, disheveled, her face lined with exhaustion and something darker. Her eyes swept the room, wild and searching, until they landed on the twins. The girls flinched. The woman's face twisted with something that resembled both fury and desperation as she stalked toward them. "I told you not to talk to anyone," she hissed. Keanu instinctively rose from his seat. His protective instincts flared, but he kept his expression neutral. "Is there a problem?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. The woman's gaze flicked to him, and for the first time, recognition flared in her eyes. Her expression shifted, calculating. You're that actor." Keanu ignored the comment. His focus was on the twins, who were now standing rigidly still, their small hands clenched into fists. "What's going on here?" he asked. The woman exhaled sharply, grabbing one of the girls by the arm. "None of your business." The girl winced but didn't make a sound. The other twin took a nervous step forward but froze when the woman shot her a glare. Keanu's fists tightened at his sides. Every part of him screamed that something was very, very wrong. As the woman dragged the twins toward the door, one of them twisted her head back, her eyes meeting Keanu's one last time. "Please," she mouthed. And that was it. The moment everything changed. Keanu grabbed his jacket and followed. Keanu's heart pounded as he stepped out of the McDonald's and into the cold night air. The woman was already halfway across the dimly lit parking lot, dragging the twins behind her. The little girls weren't crying, but their stiff movements, the way their feet barely lifted off the ground, told him everything he needed to know. This wasn't just a mother taking her children home. This was something much worse. Keanu tightened his grip on his jacket, debating his next move. He had no proof, no real reason to intervene beyond his gut instinct. But something about the way that girl had mouthed "please" had settled deep into his bones. He couldn't just walk away. He followed at a distance, his footsteps quiet, his mind racing. The woman reached an old, rusted sedan parked at the far end of the lot. She yanked open the back door and motioned for the twins to get inside. One of the girls hesitated, just for a second, but it was enough. The woman grabbed her roughly by the shoulder and shoved her in. That was it. Keanu stepped forward. "Hey!" The woman froze. Slowly, she turned to face him. "I told you." "I know," he interrupted, his voice steady, controlled. "I just wanted to ask you something." Her eyes darted toward the restaurant, then back to him. "I don't have time for this." Keanu took another step closer, positioning himself between her and the driver's door. He forced his posture to stay relaxed, his expression neutral. "Are these your daughters?" The woman narrowed her eyes. "What kind of question is that?" Keanu kept his gaze locked onto hers. "Because if they are, why do they look so scared of you?" The muscles in her jaw tightened. "Listen, I don't know who you think you are. I'm just someone who saw them begging for food inside a McDonald's," Keanu said, voice like steel. "And now I'm seeing them being forced into a car with a woman who looks ready to bolt." The woman let out a humorless laugh. "Are you serious? You're gonna lecture me? You have no idea what it's like out here." She reached for the car door handle. Keanu's hand shot out, gripping it before she could pull it open. "You're right," he said. "I don't know what it's like, but I do know when something isn't right. And this," he gestured toward the car, "this isn't right." Inside, the twins sat motionless, their wide eyes bouncing between him and the woman. The woman exhaled sharply, as if trying to decide whether to argue or fight. Then, without warning, she lunged. Keanu barely had time to react before she shoved him with surprising strength, breaking his grip on the door. He stumbled back, catching himself just before he hit the pavement. By the time he looked up, she had already yanked the driver's door open. "No!" Keanu surged forward, gripping the edge of the car as she slid into the seat and fumbled for the ignition. For a split second, he locked eyes with the girl in the back seat, the one who had whispered to him inside. Keanu made a decision. He reached inside, unbuckled the child's seatbelt, and pulled her out in one swift motion. The woman shrieked, "What the hell are you doing?" The other twin started crying, clinging to her sister as Keanu lifted her into his arms. "Come on," he murmured, turning toward the restaurant. But before he could take a step, the engine roared to life. Tires screeched. Keanu barely had time to twist his body before the car lurched forward, nearly clipping him. He stumbled back, shielding the girl in his arms as the vehicle sped out of the parking lot. The second twin was still inside. Keanu stood frozen, breathing hard, his pulse hammering in his ears. The little girl in his arms clutched his jacket, her tiny fingers digging into the fabric. "You have to get her back," she whispered. Keanu exhaled sharply, scanning the direction the car had gone. "I will," he promised. Keanu wasted no time. He carried the girl inside the McDonald's, placing her gently into a booth near the window. "Stay here," he said, looking into her frightened eyes. "I need to find your sister." She clutched his sleeve. "Please don't let them hurt her." Keanu squeezed her hand. "I won't." Then he was gone. Outside, his car was parked near the entrance. He jumped in, slamming the door shut, and peeled out of the lot. His eyes darted from street to street, searching for any sign of the rusted sedan. He didn't have a plan, didn't know what he was up against, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to let that little girl disappear. His foot pressed harder on the gas, and the chase was on. Keanu's fingers clenched around the steering wheel as his car roared down the empty streets. His pulse pounded in his ears, his breath coming in sharp, controlled bursts. He had chased villains on screen, but this was real. A little girl's life depended on him. His eyes darted from one streetlight to the next, searching. The woman's rusted sedan had vanished into the night, but he refused to accept that he had lost her. His gut told him she wasn't going far. Then, a flash of movement. Up ahead, the taillights of an old sedan flickered as it turned sharply down a narrow alley. Keanu's jaw tightened. "Got you." He accelerated, tires screeching against the pavement as he took the turn. His car barely fit into the alley, the walls of old brick buildings closing in on both sides. At the end of the passage, the sedan had stopped outside a dilapidated warehouse. Keanu killed the headlights and parked just around the corner, out of sight. He took a deep breath, steadying himself. Then he stepped out. The air smelled of rust and damp concrete as Keanu crept toward the warehouse. He kept to the shadows, his every sense on high alert. He could hear muffled voices inside. The woman's sharp, panicked tone. A man's low, menacing reply. Then, a child's whimper. Keanu's stomach twisted. He moved quickly, pressing himself against the rusted metal door, listening. "You were supposed to bring both." The man's voice was cold, calculating. "She fought me," the woman snapped. "Some guy got involved. I had to get out of there." A pause. Then the man exhaled through his nose. "You're getting sloppy." "I can fix this," she insisted. "Just give me time." Silence. Then, the sound of heavy boots stepping closer. "You better hope so," the man muttered. Keanu had heard enough. His body moved before his mind even caught up. He stepped back and slammed his foot into the door. The rusted hinges gave way with a deafening crack, sending the metal slab crashing inward. The woman shrieked. The man spun around, eyes wide. And there, standing in the middle of the room, was the little girl. She was shaking, her small hands balled into fists, eyes brimming with fear. Keanu didn't hesitate. He moved fast, closing the distance between them. "It's okay," he murmured. "I'm here." The man lunged, but Keanu was quicker. He sidestepped, twisting the man's arm behind his back and slamming him against the wall. "I'd suggest you stay down," he growled. The woman, still frozen in shock, made a break for the exit. Keanu let her go. His priority was the girl. Kneeling, he met the child's terrified gaze. "Let's get you out of here." She hesitated for just a second, then threw her arms around his neck. Keanu lifted her gently, cradling her against his chest. "You're safe now." And then, sirens. Red and blue lights flooded the alleyway as police cars skidded to a stop outside the warehouse. Keanu exhaled. Finally, the police swarmed the scene, taking the man into custody and questioning the woman, who had been caught just outside. Keanu, still holding the little girl, stepped out of the warehouse. And there, standing beside a patrol car, was her twin sister. The moment the girls saw each other, they broke into sobs. Keanu set the rescued twin down just in time for her sister to throw her arms around her. They clung to each other, shaking, whispering between their cries. Keanu swallowed the lump in his throat. A detective approached. "Mr. Reeves, we got your call. Your friend Robbie filled us in on what was happening. Do you have any idea what you just uncovered?" Keanu glanced back at the warehouse. The weight of the night settled over him. "A trafficking ring," he said. The detective nodded grimly. "And not a small one." He gestured toward the man being shoved into the back of a squad car. "That guy, he's a recruiter. He finds kids, then sells them to the highest bidder." Keanu's stomach turned. He had seen evil before. But this was a different kind of darkness. He turned back to the girls, who were now wrapped in warm blankets, sitting in the back of an ambulance. "What's going to happen to them?" The detective sighed. "We'll contact social services. Try to find a safe place for them." Keanu's jaw tightened. He crouched in front of the girls, lowering his voice. "Do you have any family? Anyone we can call?" The twins shook their heads in unison. Keanu exhaled. Then, without hesitation, he looked up at the detective. "I'll take care of them." The officer blinked. "You, what?" Keanu turned back to the twins. "You're not going into the system," he said softly. "Not if I can help it." Tears welled in their eyes. "You mean you'll keep us?" one of them whispered. Keanu smiled. "If you'll have me." They didn't hesitate. Both girls threw their arms around him, clinging to him as though he were their last anchor to safety. And in that moment, Keanu knew this wasn't just a rescue. It was a new beginning for all of them. In the days that followed, Keanu worked closely with authorities to ensure the trafficking ring was dismantled. More children were rescued. More arrests were made. But for him, the biggest victory was much closer to home. He stood in his kitchen one morning, watching as the twins, now safe, now healing, giggled over their breakfast, making a mess with their pancakes. For the first time since that fateful night, they looked like children again. Keanu smiled. He had spent his life in the spotlight, adored by millions. But in the quiet moments, in the unseen battles, he had found something far more meaningful. A purpose, a family, and an unshakable belief that sometimes, stepping into the darkness was the only way to bring back the light. The end.